Oops. Hello, good morning. My name's Boone Bergsma, and I'm coming from a project called CarbonLand Trust. And we're, in my opinion, making the most ESG NFTs. And why I say that is because we're creating digital assets that protect and conserve forest land perpetually forever for the purpose of CO2 sequestration. And we are getting ready to launch the very first series of CO2 bonds. And what these bonds represent for us and for people in the future is these are NFTs that allow landowners to create a packaged bond for carbon removal, CO2 sequestration from their forest when they join our conservation protocol. And so what this allows landowners to do is right now in the carbon market is actually very hard for smaller landowners to even take part in the markets because of the cost involved. And, generally right now CO2 is kind of selling for, let's just say around $15, $20 a ton. And so if you don't have a ton of acres, selling 1 year worth of carbon credits really in a lot of cases isn't even enough money to pay for the validation of those credits. And so it can be a very expensive process to get started. And so what these bonds allow landowners to do is to package up the carbon credits into a long-term contract, for example, 20 years. And then those who are buying these bonds, like brands who have carbon neutral, carbon negative pledges, or even individuals that just want to offset their, their own CO2, they can buy these bonds at an upfront price. So what you would be doing is you'd be paying for the carbon credits. This bond would issue 1 carbon credit a year, each year for 20 years. And so you would be paying that $15 or $20 a ton, whatever the landowner had priced the carbon removal at, and then paying that over 20 years term. So our first bonds, for example, are going to be priced at $15 a ton. And so a 20-year bond would cost $300. And what this does is it allows, so brands, for example, who are buying hundreds or millions of tons of carbon removal credits, like Microsoft or Shell or some of the others out there, of course, they would buy, multiples of these bonds, however many they're wanting to lock in that long-term supply in. And the reason this helps them is because almost everyone is estimating that the price of carbon credits is going to be start going up substantially over the next few years. And that's due, one, because the more brands than ever are getting on the bandwagon to lower their emissions and join, climate action pledges. And so that's put a lot of pressure on the market. And brands are also more than ever being very particular about what kind of credits they're buying. And so right now in the marketplace, there's a big shift between carbon removal credits and carbon reduction credits. And the difference between those is carbon credits that are removal credits are actually sequestering CO2 from the atmosphere, whereas carbon credits that come from reduction projects just means that a solar panel is generating electricity, and therefore, since that's not coming from that electricity is not coming from a coal plant, that now there's a reduction in credits. And even worse, sometimes carbon credits are coming from filters that are put on smokestacks of buildings. So they're actually they might be reducing what CO2 is being entered in the atmosphere, but they're actually not helping get any of the CO2 that's in the atmosphere out. And that's how brands like Microsoft are making major coming out and saying that there's not even enough verifiable carbon removal credits to even meet Microsoft's demand. So, there's definitely a market for this. And if smaller landowners could take part in that market, they could help fill some of that demand. And these bonds allow those brands and people to lock in a supply, but also lock in a price at today's thing. So when they buy these bonds, instead of in 5 years, maybe having to pay for $100 a ton for credits, by buying these bonds, they would have already locked in supply at $15 a ton at today's prices. And so we're excited that we're working with Carbon Swap to, I believe this Thursday, the second, tomorrow, is the launch of their new NFT marketplace. And we're excited that our bonds are going to be offered on that marketplace. So we're really getting ready to run a pilot program. And in that pilot program, I'll show you this real quick. This is a green paper to explain the project. And here's a little bit that goes over the difference between what I was saying about, CarbonLand Trusts, carbon credits, are coming from trees that are being allowed to grow into old growth forest forever. And these forests are now going to be publicly accessible through like Airbnb and HipCamp. So the difference between other, let's just say even nature-based carbon credits that are out there that are coming from like improved forestry management projects, those are good projects, right? But the truth of those projects is still that those trees are going to be cut down at some point. And when they are cut down, there will be a CO2 creating process from all the machines that are involved in that, the trucking, the milling. There's tons of things that will then create maybe even potentially more CO2 than the trees have been claimed to reduce. And then there's also carbon credits that are coming from new technologies like direct air capture, which are also things that, are going to be probably needed. But also the beginning, we have to remember that to get to this spot, a direct air capture unit, there's mining, there's all kinds of things, manufacturing that go into creating carbon before this device ever potentially starts removing any CO2 from the atmosphere, where trees left to grow into huge old growth forests, there's no inputs required from electricity or pollution created to get that started. The way our bonds work is each year the bond will issue real carbon credits that will be claimable for offsetting report purposes. This is an example of how a bond, the credits that are inside of it. And another unique aspect that we're doing is every project that becomes a conservation project in CarbonLand Trust, there are unique individual NFTs made to represent each acre of that project. So in our pilot project, for example, is 40 acres. So there'll be 40 of these NFTs. And these NFTs are in a way like a timeshare. So whoever has this NFTs, just like someone who has a timeshare, they'll have rights to enjoy this forest land and any other forest land in CarbonLand Trust, conservation. So these NFTs will actually yield passes each month that the people can then use themselves to visit forest land in the trust, or they could even sell those passes to other people who wanted to spend time in the trust. As I mentioned on our roadmap, is we're getting ready to list the first batch of these NFTs on Carbon Swap for sale. Then we'll be going through a process. We're working really hard to develop a MRV process that will allow more landowners to easily be able to go through that measure, report, and verification process needed to issue credits. And we'll be using the Climate Actions Reserves SIM methodology, and then this great tool called Carrot, that this tool was funded by a USDA grant, And what's awesome about Carrot is if you do the measurement process correct on your land, when you enter into this software, you'll actually get pre-validated report, right? So unlike if you were to do all the math, that's they provide you all the equations out there to calculate your carbon storage and all that kind of stuff. Well, then if you do that yourself, you have to have all that validated by somewhere else. Where if you use this free tool, since the math is all built into the tool and cannot make any mistakes, you'll actually, by using this tool, you'll get pre-validated reporting. That's a picture of the project that we're working on, and that's pretty much the rundown. Appreciate your guys' time listening, and would love to answer any questions that you had about what we're doing.
That's fantastic stuff, Boone. Here's one link that I just thought of as we were doing this. We had a talk a couple of months ago by the guy that runs the American Forest Foundation. He was talking about how they're doing carbon capture for their members. So maybe it's just interesting background. So how do you do how do you certify the carbon is retained? What's that look like?
Yep. So, generally right now in the MRV processes that are out there, it's a combination of satellite and in-person visits. And most places out there right now that are taking part in the carbon credits, primarily it's, satellite imagery is used once a year. And at the beginning of most projects, they'll have an in-person visit, but then they're lucky if, they have another in-person visit in 5 or 6 years, because it's generally an expense that projects don't want to pay for. And so as long as they can validate with just their satellite, that's usually how they do it. But what we're going above and beyond to actually and turn MRV processes into, something in a way, instead of becoming a burden, but becoming a benefit, is this ecotourism aspect, right? So we will use the latest in satellite technology to monitor our forests that are enrolled from the beginning, all the way through the lifespan of the project. And in the future, we'll actually probably do that on more than a once a year basis than other projects, and create kind of a fun time lapse area in our website where people can see the progression of projects and stuff. But the other aspect of what I was saying is this ecotourism. So we will use the beginning of all projects, part of what the funds raised from the CO2 bonds have to be used for is that initial professional measurement verification. The teams come out and they measure trees at certain spots, and then from then on, those spots are used for future measuring the size of the trees and the growth and reporting. And so what we're going to be doing is after those have been developed and done the first time, we will be using the people do these things called geocaching, where they're going out and they're finding different geolocations. And right, so the land that is enrolled in CarbonLand Trust is pretty much, in a lot of ways, they're starting a conservation park. So this is a place where people can come and have fun outdoor experiences, and one of those fun outdoor experiences will actually be these geocaching MRV bounties. So people that are coming to this property because they want to spend time outdoors will have opportunities to kind of go on like treasure hunts in a way on these properties. And the things that they'll need to do is to actually verify that oh yeah, this tree is this big around, or whatever, different things like that. And then they'll get bounties from doing that as well.
That's a fun addition.
Yeah. And what's different about that than others is right is we're these, like I was mentioning, other projects, they're lucky if someone, most time public has no accessibility to these projects, and a lot of times they're huge swaths of land owned by lumber companies, and no public is going to be allowed to enjoy that land. It's for production only. And the they're also, like I was mentioning, the reporting that's coming, is the in-person visits for the actual verification, of the land and how it's growing is not happening very often. Where on our properties, we're kind of, estimating that these properties are going to have those plots valid, reviewed and validated probably once a month. So like 10 to 20 times or 30 times more often than what other projects are being measured and validated.
And so you're going to do the first sale soon? Is it?
Yeah, we're so working. Carbon Swap has a NFT marketplace that, if all goes well, it's supposed to launch tomorrow. But in the blockchain world, sometimes things get delayed a day here or a day two, to make sure they're working properly. But this week we anticipate that the bonds will be on the market, and it's a very exciting thing because this has been almost a year working on this project to put it together and get the pilot ready. And
Well, congratulations.
yeah, thank you.
Now what are the hard bits? What's your next challenge, I guess? I'm trying to think of like if in the GRC context, if the idea is that people in the GRC are able or willing to help you get to your next step, I'm kind of trying to figure out like what would you ask people to do, or how could they help, or what's your next challenge?
Yeah, so of course, one way to always help would to buy one of these carbon removal bonds, but also we're looking. So the whole point of this pilot is to develop a platform that makes it easy for other forest owners to be able to, if they're interested in regenerative conservation, if that's the plan that they have for their land, we would like to talk to them and begin this exploratory process of like seeing kind of what roadblocks they might see for themselves. Not every landowner views these things the same, and so we really will be looking to have conversations with potential landowners who might want to tokenize their forest for for conservation, and begin selling carbon credits. So that's another thing we'll be looking for, is connecting with, really, I would say, landowners who have 10 acres or more of forest land and are interested in perpetual conservation of those trees.
So from listening to like Tom Martin in this link that I put in the chat,
I'll check it out. Thank you.
Yeah. So American Forest Foundation, I guess, represents like family forest owners. And he was saying one of the issues that they've had around carbon credits is that the people want like 100-year kind of time span, and none of the families want to commit to 100 years.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can totally understand that. Most, and that's where even we've taken that a step further. So we're not saying that you can even cut down your trees in 100 years. This is CarbonLand Trust protocol is a perpetual conservation. So as long as those trees can live and survive, that the job is to maintain them for that purpose. And the reason a lot of landowners have reservations around committing to that kind of thing is because generally these families have maintained their livelihood off of the harvesting of these trees, and selling the timber. And so making that transition is kind of I think really is a scary thing for a lot of farmers. And like I mentioned, most um, right now, the way, it works is you're going to issue once a year, and then you've got to help that you sell all those credits that year, right? And that's kind of hard for a landowner to know how this is going to work for them over the long term. And that's where we're different, where we're doing these bonds. The bonds allow landowners to make enough upfront to make it economically feasible to do this long term, and then also provides them, security, knowing that, you know, for the next, they've already pre-sold in a way, they've kind of 20 years worth of value. So then it also gives them, 20 years to prepare to find another buyer for the next bonds they issue. So we're trying to alleviate some of those concerns of like, well, what happens next year? Well, what happens next year? But that is a major concern, and this, I already know up front that CarbonLand Trust is not going to be for everyone and every landowner, right? Because we are asking, a very specific particular type of land management, and these to even be able to issue bonds and tokens from your land, you will have to have this legally recorded on the title and deed of your property. So even future buyers will know that if they're buying this land, they're not going to be able to cut down the trees, and what they're buying is a conservation park.
Wow, fantastic. Yeah. So you kind of have to, it's a two-sided problem. You have to sell the bonds to a market, and you have to convince the landowners to tokenize their land, I guess, right? So you have kind of
Yeah, the
stakeholders.
landowners come first, and then once so this kind of like the pilot project, we now have the pilot project. So we'll create the bonds, and then when the bonds sell, that creates the project. And so it's kind of like a package. Like the landowner is not going to even get, if one bond sells, then in the end the bond money will be returned to the person who bought that bond, right? All the bonds have to sell to start the project, right? And that's like where I was saying, like, even the bond sales, they're going to pay for the verification, they're going to pay for the legal, all the legal stuff that's required to put it in the thing, right? So there's no commitment, there's no like actual the land being committed by the landowner until all the bonds have sold and raised the money to initiate that project. And but then again, you're right. We have to find someone to buy. We have to find enough people and brands to buy all the bonds. So there is a two-sided problem, but we are, it's kind of like, I guess just hope you finding one or the other, and then you can find the other one after.
Yeah, no, I hear you. Well, it just seems like you kind of have to market it differently. You're right.
Yes, 100%.
It's just a very
yeah. And so I'm not sure if you guys are aware, but just recently, Shell had a Dutch court ruling against it that pretty much now requires them to buy 100 million carbon credits a year for the next like 30 years. And to put that into perspective, there was only 260 million carbon credits issued last year. So now Shell is legally required to almost buy half the carbon credit marketplace, right? So this is like, who knows what will happen, but there is demand for these kind of projects. I think that, so this is another unique thing that CarbonLand Trust is doing, is these bonds are something kind of brand new in the voluntary carbon market. So really until today, brands, always just source, each year they have to go out and source all these carbon credits, and then do the same thing next year, right? Look for them all over again next year. And, like I mentioned, Microsoft's reporting that, they are struggling at this, at finding enough of these things. So I do believe that the brands that have real commitments to climate action and these carbon neutral pledges will be the perfect kind of customers that will be interested in buying this bond-like product that allows them to lock in low prices today and know that, at least for a portion of the carbon credits they need, they don't have to go and find those each year. They've already got them, on reserve for the next 20 years. And so, with the pressure that I think is going to be in the market over the next coming years, I think buyers will be more attracted to products like our CO2 removal bonds because they offer them that ability to, save money in the future and also not have to worry about supply.
You're on mute, David. I wanted to jump in and say I definitely learned a lot with this. I was mentioning to David, like when you started the carbon credit and all of that, that's a new field for me. So for me, getting introduced this way is awesome. I would say CarbonLand Trust, carbon credits for removal, ESG NFT, intersections of ESG NFTs and geocaching, ecotourism. I think that's a great plugin. Especially recently, I've read that people are gonna want more of connection in the nature to even mentally be healthy. Forget about physical. I mean, that's a given. So more and more conservation parks like these are gonna be important for our well-being as humans and the ecosystems also we thrive in. So I'm like on the top of the world learning about this stuff. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate being able to share this today, and I know this will be recorded, so anyone that sees this in the future and you're interested in learning more, please connect and be glad to answer any questions. And as I mentioned, we're really kind of launching this week, so I'll be glad to share with what we're learning too in the future and how things work and as they develop, because I think there's an opportunity for people who are really interested in regenerative land stewardship to this is an way, an economic model to be able to, make, if you're a timberland owner, instead of, counting on income from cutting down your trees, this is a way you could count on income from protecting those trees.
Yeah, beautiful. Love it. Awesome. I'm gonna stop recording if that is okay.
That's good. Thank you.
Thank you.